Wanted to talk to you today about the forensics of testing, and I'm so glad to be here. Thanks to the folks that invited me to be here for TestFest. It's been a very strange 2020 to not get to travel and go all the places that I'm used to going, and but I've been very privileged to get to speak at 31 events this year, which is 3 times more than I usually speak, and that just surprised me. But my name is Mike Lyles. I am a director of QA and project management with a company called Bridgetree. We do marketing services. I'm not here to promote them, so that's all I'll tell you there. But it's a very fun company. I've been there 4 years. Started out as a developer and really loved development. I thought that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life, and it was not what I ended up doing for the rest of my life. Got into PMO and liked that for some time. But then I fell in love with leading people and managing groups of people, and I became a project manager for some large teams at the company I was with at the time, and then I found testing, and once I found testing, it was never going to be the same for me. I said, "This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, I'm sure, or at least the rest of my career." I've worked with a lot of different areas, been very privileged to work in a lot of places. And really, my strengths, I think, are around building teams. The company that I'm with right now, and I've been here 4 years, has did not have a QA team when I started, and we put together the team. We now have 10 folks on my team in our Bangalore office, and I just really take pride in building process methodologies, looking at measurement, and notice it's not metrics there, because metrics are just the numbers. The measurement is really what you're doing with it. And the last thing that I'll tell you before I start into the presentation is I have a book. The book is called The Drive-Thru is Not Always Faster. It's definitely, thanks to COVID, most places the drive-thru is the only way. So the book is not really selling the theory very much, but we'll talk about that as we go through these slides. But it's a self-help book, 30 chapters. Each chapter is a different story, a lot of fun to read. And you buy it and read one a day, a chapter a day, and you'll be done in a month. But let's talk about forensics of testing. And let's talk about crime shows and my addiction to crime shows, being part of crime shows, and not being part of it, thankfully, but participating and watching them. And Dateline was my first. So in the US, there's a show here called Dateline. Absolutely love this show. It comes on every Friday or Saturday, sometimes both, which is exciting. But it's around mostly murder mysteries, but it's true stories, and it's a lot of fun to watch. I got myself, if you're a tester, it kind of pulls you in, because you want to solve the case just like you want to solve whether or not the product is working. So Dateline kind of got my attention, and I couldn't stop. And then came 48 Hours, which is another network show that's very similar to Dateline, and I started watching it. So every week I had at least 2 shows every week that I could watch around crime shows, forensics. And then I met Investigation Discovery, which is an amazing 24-hour crime network, or Investigation Discovery is, they have multiple crime shows, real life stories. Some we're going to talk about along the way here, but I was in heaven. I watch it all the time. It became my new Netflix, because I love watching the different types of shows they have and the different variations of how that they solve crime and how that they go about figuring out who committed the crime, who was the victim. It's pretty easy, the victim, but who committed it is tough. But one thing that I found was there's always a common theme when I'm watching these shows, and that's what I've noticed through my years of watching the crime shows and watching how they do forensics and forensic investigations. And that is, they'll start you out with an initial tease. So when the show starts, they're showing you previews of what's going on. Somebody was found dead in their home. The family was not there. Somebody walked by. This happened, that happened. And they start showing you a few clips of things that foreshadow what you're going to see along the way. And so it gets you drawn in. And you're immediately interested and anxious to see what's coming next. And then they start giving you incremental facts. And those incremental facts are good because they help you understand who was this person, what happened to them, what was their history, where did they work, who was their family, how many kids did they have, who was their spouse, different things like that. And as you hear the story, they start feeding you that. And you start, as a tester, if you're like me, you start drawing those conclusions really quick, and you start saying, oh, I know what happened. I see what's happening here. I see what the folks have done. But then they start giving you misleading clues, and that throws you. And as you're watching the show, you're starting to think, I know it was the spouse. They did it. And it may or may not be the spouse, or it may or may not be the brother or the sister or the relative or the neighbor. You don't know, but you think you do because you're drawing those conclusions a little bit too fast. But then as the show progresses, you get more details. And maybe there's an anonymous phone call, an anonymous tip that comes in. Maybe they find some surveillance video that helps. Maybe some new evidence pops up, or DNA or fingerprints, and then suddenly you got a final surprise. And in that final surprise, you're like, wow, I didn't see that coming. And that got me thinking and about how that we do that sometimes as testers. And as testers, we draw conclusions. We start seeing a trend, and we're like, that I know what the problem is. And if we're not careful, we draw those conclusions too fast, and it gets us in trouble because we think we've diagnosed the problem, and maybe it's not a problem, or maybe we've diagnosed it as, well, that's not an issue there, and it is. So we have to be good at what we do, and we have to be like these forensics investigators who really put a lot of time and effort into really digging into the details so that they can give a good response. Surveillance cameras, a big deal. Cameras see everything that the investigators miss. And the thing about cameras, there's a show on Investigation Discovery Network called See No Evil. And the one phrase they always say is, cameras don't lie. Suspects, victims, witnesses may lie. Of course, I wrote that, and victims don't lie. They're dead. But cameras don't lie. And in testing, this is where I see automation and tools and other things that you can use to supplement your work that can help you, especially around tools that you're designing, visual testing tools, automation tools, to help look for things that you might miss as a tester. You might overlook, but it's going to catch it because it's designed to catch those things. And it's a good checking process to build that in while you're doing the thinking testing and evaluating the product. So never underestimate the power of what tools can do to help you supplement what you do as a tester. DNA, DNA is a crime scene's critical data. Years ago, DNA was not a big thing. It actually was not a thing at all. And we didn't have this perfect element to support our investigations. And many years ago, they had to use fingerprints, blood types, and other data to solve the case. And they didn't even know what DNA was. And I watch a lot of these shows where they talk about crimes that happened decades ago. And I realize, and they always say, man, if we'd had DNA, this would have been solved long ago. And you see them now going back to cold cases that may be 30, 40 years old and solving the case because they're actually able to pull DNA and figure out who it was that did it. And they couldn't do that 20, 30, 40 years ago. So DNA helps us to be specific in those accusations and to fully incriminate those that are guilty, or show innocence for those who are not guilty. And the same applies with testing, because the things that we do today may not be the things that we need to do tomorrow. They talk about, Stephen Covey says, nothing fails like success. And I love that because he talks about how that things you do today, he puts his hands up and he says, here's what I do today to solve this problem. But when the problem grows, what I'm doing today might not solve that problem. And we have to know that as testers, there's tools that we may not have used a decade ago that we're using now, or 5 years ago. There's tools that we may not even know about yet that are going to become really powerful helping tools for us as we go through our career. So be on the lookout for those things, and always be looking for something new, a new process, new tool, a new way that you can change your thinking, and always be open to that. I've got a quote that I've came up with is regret is the most expensive emotion. And it's true. If you've ever had a major regret in life, a lot of the times you think about, wow, I missed a perfect opportunity that I really could have done differently if I'd have taken the different path and I'd have done this differently. And and we know that it's expensive because we can't change it. You can think about the past, I missed that opportunity, but you can't go back and change the past. All you can do is fix the future. Crime scene investigators, they take those decisions on evidences that they have. And sometimes they think they know the problem and then they miss it. And as great testers, you have to go on your leads and your hunches, and don't let regret steal your ability to be a great tester and to really go after some ideas that you may think, I should really go down this path and look at this. Planning is critical, especially in the forensics and the investigating side. People know you for what you've done, not for what you plan to do. We can all have great plans. Great investigators who only plan to research things never solve the case. Great testers can plan well. You can have a beautiful test plan. You can have a beautiful mind map, beautiful scenarios. But if you're not doing the execution correctly and you're not following the right process, then it's just a plan. It's not getting things done. So remember that, you're going to be remembered for what you've done, not for what you plan to do. So let's talk about some of the comparisons between testing and forensics. The first one, I'm going to give you five. I believe five. We'll see how far it goes. The one thing we do in the U.S. is we have a law, and I don't know if it's everywhere, but I know in the U.S. it's called the Miranda Rights. And what happens is these are rights that are given to everybody so that they know what they can and can't do. And you see crime shows where the investigators get into some serious trouble if they have not read these rights to the people. And it goes around, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you can say anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided. Do you understand these rights? And with these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me? The criminal, the suspect, the person that's being convicted has the right to say, I don't want to talk to you and I need a lawyer. And it made me think about testing. We need to know the ways of working within our team. We need to know that the team is aligned and agreeing on how we work together. We need to have a good test charter in place. We need to know, what is our process? What is our cadence of how we're going to work together? And you should do that early in the process. One big thing that catches a lot of investigators is getting fooled by their initial findings. Use everything that you find, but continue to find more. If you're testing something, you say, I think I found the problem. Keep looking, keep understanding the product, get more familiar with what you're testing and what things you're doing. I always tell my team, log more than defects and keep really good observation notes. Understand that we have a section within our team where you can log those notes, and we don't want developers to say, well, these are not defects. We know they're not defects, but they're observations. There are things that we write down, such as, I don't know if this is a problem, but I think that window is the wrong shape. I think the font is the wrong font. I think the application's not really taking me to the right place that I need to go. Things like that. There are things that you may feel that are not working properly, but you don't know for sure if they're defects yet. That may make people that work with you take that step and say, yes, you're exactly right. That question made me understand that there is a problem here, and let's resolve it. Number 3 is don't rule out anything initially. If you watch crime shows like me, the crime scene investigators immediately start pulling out the yellow tape, wrapping it around the crime scenes. They start looking for clues everywhere, taking pictures of everything. Everything is consequential at that point, and they're starting to pull in all the data. They don't know whether it's going to be something important or not yet. They're just saying, I see a cup on the floor. I see glass broken. I see blood in the corner of the room. I see the covers or the sheets are not on the beds, things like that. They look for everything. And they Monitor every major and minor detail and record it. Nothing's inconsequential at first. And that's the critical thing here is you may need to use that later. So as you're testing things, be thinking about what things you're looking at. Hey, I just noticed this. Let's take that down for later. I'll come back to it. Number 4 is innocent until proven guilty. That is one of the legal terms that is used here a lot. Is this, your suspect is innocent until proven guilty. And I would say in the testing world, it's broken until proven quality from our standpoint. Investigators will start with the family. They'll look, internally, because a large percentage of the crimes that are committed in the home like that are usually caused by a family member, a spouse or a child or a parent. And so they start in the middle and then they work their way out. So once they've decided it's not the husband, it's not the wife, it's not the kids, not the brother or the sister, then they start moving out. And testing needs to do the same thing. We start with the core functions, understand the product, understand what we're doing with the product, and then, explore with higher coverage and continue to grow. Number 5 is compile the results. Great investigators are always in continuous discovery mode, always looking for that next thing, that next clue that might break the case. They always talk about breaking the case. They go for months. Some of these cold cases that I watch, they've gone for decades, and then suddenly something pops up and they're like, wow, that's it. They share with the community along the way, and they take inputs, anonymous calls, anonymous tips, people saying, hey, I think I might have seen something suspicious. And they look at those things over and over. And a lot of times it's going back that second or third time that they say, well, I didn't notice this the first 2 times. I just noticed this is something we need to dig further into. And sometimes that breaks the case. So as testers, and when you think the worst thing we can do as testers is to get satisfied and get happy and say, we're good. We don't need to do too much of regression testing. Everything's fine here. I know that's going to work always, because that's the time it's not going to work. When I look at similarities about why do we do forensics versus why we do testing, it's very similar. Forensics, they look at guilt versus innocent, accused versus innocence there. In testing, we're trying to define whether the product is working as expected and if there's any risks or impacts to that. Very similar. We're trying to solve whether or not this is good or bad. Similarities on how it's done. Forensics, they study their findings. They research the clues. They're pointing out anything suspicious that they see until they solve the case. Testing is very similar. We're investigators. We evaluate. We understand the product. And we point out any issues or risks that we see. Very common similarities there. And when you look at who's the beneficiaries, I'm going to be quick here. On forensics, it's usually the families, the friends, people that are impacted by the crime. They want to know who did this. Why did they do it? What was their reason? And can we convict them? On the testing side, we have sponsors and stakeholders who are very close to the product, and they want to know, is it working? And they're the people that we're supporting. And the approach and time taken, so my last one here on this is, they're both very similar, if you notice. For forensics, it depends on the severity and complexity of the crime scene, the people that are doing the investigation, the budget that they have, and the tools. Very similar, very few words to change on the testing side. It depends on the complexity, the team that's testing, the budget, and the tools that they use. So we have very similar to, we can start calling ourselves crime scene investigators now. Which makes me tell you this. Testers need to be partners in crime. And now don't go out and commit a crime and say that Mike told me to be a criminal. What I'm wanting to do is show you a mnemonic, CRIME, which I say, and I made up, and it stands for collaboration, requirements, investigate, mind map, and explore. And I want to touch on these 5 really quick, and then we'll wrap up. But let's go through them. For C, it's collaboration. We no longer live in a world where in our teams, we can have a test team and a development team and a project manager team and a product owner team. We're all one big team. And we have to stop talking about the test team is doing this and the development team is doing that. And many of you probably already changed that wording in your language at your office or at your work. But we have to do that. We have to say that we're all one team. Quality is everybody's responsibility. QA should be quality assistance, not quality assurance. And we have to remove those silos. Agile has put us into pair development, pair testing, working together side by side, developers working with testers, testers working with developers. And we have to do that. And to be very successful, we have to know what they're doing, they have to know what we're doing, and we have to do it together. Collaboration becomes critical. R is requirements. And I love that Michael Bolton, I asked him not long ago, what is the one thing you would say to somebody who's just starting testing that you would say if there was one thing? And he didn't like having to have one thing, but he did say, get very close to your stakeholders and how the stakeholders are going to use that product, because it's very important that you understand the requirements. And beyond just understanding a requirement set, one thing I ask people when I interview them is, what do you do if I put you on a project and I don't have a requirements document? And a lot of people will say to me, I can't test if I don't have a document. And I say, that's not true. You know that. It's not true. Because I can hand them a remote control for a TV and they'll tell me exactly how they're going to test it. And the reason they can is because they know what that product does. They don't need to read a manual for it. They don't need to read requirements. And you have to do the same. You need to become very intimate with that project and that application and really understand, what does the stakeholders want? How are they going to use it? And how do they expect it's going to work for them? Understanding the requirements is one of the most critical things you can do as a tester. I is for investigate. And we'll slide through this pretty quick, but don't just do step 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Doesn't matter whether you're on the side of we do requirements-based testing and traditional testing, or we do context-driven testing, or which side you believe or what testing school you're from. Go beyond the scripts. Get involved in the design process. Get involved in the user interface, user experience. Be involved early in the process and understand that you can test long before the application's in your hands. You can test requirements, you can test details about the design and the interface. And M is for mind maps. And if you get nothing out of this presentation that I'm running through today, you need to know what mind maps are. If you're not using them, please Google it, reach out to me, study somebody's writings on mind maps, because mind maps are extremely important and in a very critical way to show coverage, define your plans, have team discussions, and talk about your approaches and to be able to collaborate together. I got one example here where if you look, there's login accounts, users. These are all functions within this application or features. The first branch out of that mind map is the features, and then you can add more things to it. It's open for you to use. But I find that we live we work in groups where everybody has their own language, right? So product managers and project managers are talking about user stories and timelines and milestones. Developers are talking about tasks and user stories and architecture designs and things like that. And you're talking about test plans, test charters, and mind maps and scenarios and test summaries and defects. But the way you can easily talk the same language is to put this up there and have the group work with it together. Because I think you'll find that it makes everybody see it the same way. I use this and color code this to show coverage. So I use this map, and if this is green, I will say I'm going to work on the information feature and I'm going to spend a lot of time. If it's yellow, I'm going to spend a little bit of time with it. And if it's red, I'm not going to spend any time with it unless I get time to test it. So it's a quick way to show what's my coverage look like, what areas am I going to focus on. Tools, there's several out there. I'll give you a moment to scan through these, but I would suggest either Coggle or Xmind. I personally use Xmind because it's easy and it's a lot of fun and it's free. That's the best part. They have a paid version, but to get you started, you can use the free version. And as we go to E, the last of the list here, E is explore and think beyond, as I mentioned, and I intentionally said it in the last slide, and I'm going to say it again. Think beyond the test cases. Think beyond the scenarios. Exploratory testing is not ad hoc testing, and it's not monkey testing. Exploratory testing is one of the most creative ways to test an application, because you start out and you say, okay, now that I've done this, I think I need to go left. I'm not running from a script. I may go right now. I may go right again. And you're learning as you go, and you're becoming closer with the application. So remember, explore. The more you can do that, the better you're going to be at testing applications. So crime is the thing. Collaboration, requirements, investigate, mind map, and explore. And a couple of other points I'll share with you after this is that the drive-thru is not always faster. It's not just the name of a really cool book. It's also a philosophy that I live by. And I said this to a drive-thru person once, and I told them I had this book with this title. And they said, well, it may not be faster, but it's more convenient. And they're exactly right. But in our careers and our occupation, we don't get to do things just for convenience. Far too many people are making decisions because this is the way we've always done it. And you can change that. You can be different. Don't do things just because it's convenient or because you've always done it this way. Never let convenience keep you from changing what you do in your career, in your work, in your testing, your life, anything. Learn that there might be a better and a faster way, a more efficient way to do it than just the standard way that everybody else is doing it or the way you've always been doing it. And next to last slide here is this. A year ago, nobody would have known what this picture was, but today we all know what it is. COVID-19 taught us that things are going to change, and sometimes they're going to change drastically. And we have to be able to handle that. And we have to be able to adapt to those changes as they come along. It may not be as drastic as the pandemic next time. It may be a change within your organization, but you can handle it and you can make it through it, just as we've adapted and pivoted as we've gone along. So remember, you're tough. We're tough, and we're going to make it through this. And the last thing I'll say to you is this. It's a slide I start putting in every presentation now, because I think everybody needs to hear it, especially in today's time. You have the potential to be remembered for all the things you're doing today and tomorrow onward. And you don't have to be Sheryl Sandberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, any of these people to make a difference. You can change the world right where you are, doing exactly what you're doing. So I ask you today, what are you doing to be great? And what things are you doing to change the world around you? And that is the end for me.